There is no vagueness, there's no ambiguity. If you want to know how the game works, the comprehensive rules are there. Saying that if you want to play casually, don't read that document. You do not need to read that document. Go and watch our 6 minute learn to play video. It's all you need to get going. And don't worry about the comp rules. Leave that to the pro players.
Welcome to Cardboard Creations, where we discuss the process, techniques, and inspiration for designing board games. I'm your host, Candice Harris, and I'm thrilled to be here today with James White to find out how Flesh and Blood was created. But first, let's jump into a brief overview of how Flesh and Blood works. Flesh and Blood is a hero-centric fantasy trading card game which is primarily played with 2 players, although you can play it in a variety of formats, including the Ultimate Pit Fight multiplayer mode. The goal of the game is to get your opponent's health down to 0. Each player represents a character and starts the game at full health with their own weapons, equipment, and a deck of cards. Throughout the game, players take turns attacking each other with their weapons and with card effects. The cards are multi-use and can be played to attack or to defend. In addition, you can pitch cards to pay resource costs on other cards. Each character is a type of hero, and there are a variety of different types of heroes, such as ninjas, warriors, rangers, wizards, brutes, and runeblades, and they each play completely differently. You can play Flesh and Blood with pre-constructed blitz decks, or you can also custom build your own decks to play with. Either way, the last hero standing wins the game. Hi James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Candice. It's an absolute pleasure to be on the show with you today and opportunity to talk about Flesh and Blood with all the board game geek fans around the world.
Yes. I'm always so fascinated with how my love of board games kind of takes me down these paths of discovering other new things that excite me. And when I was at PAX Unplugged last year, I ended up playing, because I was doing like meetings with publishers for BGG News, and I ended up playing SoulForge Fusion, which I kind of like got really like hooked into, and that sort of led me to discover Flesh and Blood. And basically, like Aldi, the owner of Board Game Geek, when I told him, I was like, oh, I was playing this cool game, SoulForge Fusion, he asked me, he's like, oh, have you ever heard of Flesh and Blood? And I looked it up and I was like, no, never heard of it. Kind of just like moved on though and kept playing SoulForge. And then I was also watching like Team Covenant's videos on SoulForge Fusion, and they would always bring up in their videos Fab. And I was like, what is Fab? So at some point I had to like kind of like delve deeper and say, okay, now this Flesh and Blood keeps coming onto my radar. Let me see what it's all about. I bought some Blitz decks, and then I bought more Blitz decks, and then I bought more booster boxes and all sorts of things. And I absolutely got hooked, and I still am, on Flesh and Blood. I mean, I love all of the different heroes and how the different play styles of how they all work is so unique. And like the hand management decisions are just like so brain burning and awesome. So I gotta know, because this is the first trading card game that I would say I've ever really been into. Like, what initially inspired you to create Flesh and Blood?
It's a great question, and to be honest, it was actually about wanting to preserve the culture of the in-person experience, right? So like I've been in this industry for 25 years, since when I was just a young fella, and I used to go down to my local game store, and that's how I met all of my network of friends. And it took me on great adventures all across New Zealand and then eventually around the world. Playing was magic for me back in the day, and
Cool.
that was in the 90s and the early 2000s. And for me, like, it was such an important and key part of my life of having these like in-person interactions with other people, and it served as this like vehicle for taking me out and about all around the world, broadening my horizons, and play the game, see the world. And like that literally was my life in my teenage years and early 20s. And sort of I've been involved in the industry in many different capacities over the years, both in organized play, marketing, and eventually actually operated a New Zealand distribution company for all different kinds of tabletop games. And
Cool.
my heart and my passion was always really focused on trading card games. A trend that I was observing was just this migration of away from tabletop and in-store experiences and onto digital platforms. And don't get me wrong, digital is great, but I felt like it was really eroding that culture of actually people connecting over the gaming table. And that's what really mattered to me as a gamer in my life. So it was kind of, you can often just sit back and get upset or complain about things, or you can do something about it. And I was like, I'm going to do something about this. I want to preserve this culture. And that's what sort of like set us about designing Flesh and Blood.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, and I totally agree with you because that's how I kind of like I got into playing board games is I was like sick of people just always looking at their screens and I love the interaction of sitting at a table socializing with people. So that's really cool that that's kind of, where the inspiration came from. And you mentioned you played Magic a bit. Go nice. When and how did you go from that initial idea of like, hey, I want to like make something, I want to make a trading card game. How did you go from that idea into creating like a playable prototype and like how did you get started with it?
So it was a really long journey for us. It started in 2012, and like it literally was like making concept cards in Excel, right? Like just plugging words into cells and printing them out and slipping them into sleeves on top of like other cards and just like playing like literally on the kitchen table at home. And it's really as basic as that, just to get an initial idea, uh you know moving forward. And like later on we became more sophisticated with how we created our prototype cards and so on. But it was a long journey. It started in 2012 and Flesh and Blood launched in October 2019. So it was 7 years in development. And once we committed to doing this, and we committed like very quickly in 2012, like this was something we were working on every day,
Wow.
as well as having a daytime job as well. But every single day we were working on this, and
Cool.
I'm very fortunate to have great people around me. And as I mentioned, I've been in the industry for a very long time, and have a wonderful group of friends and very passionate people towards trading card games. And you see a lot of these faces working at Legend Story Studios right now, right? These are people who have been with me on this journey throughout that 25 years that I've been
Cool.
involved in different elements. But look, it's just like things start small, right? Like things don't start big, they start small, and you just have to take one step every single day towards whatever the goal is, big or small.
When did you kind of come up with the idea to have it be different types of heroes, like hero versus hero, more driven like that instead of summoning a bunch of different minions and having armies and such?
I love fantasy. Like I've always been very drawn to fantasy ever since I was very young. My favorite childhood story was King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and Excalibur and Merlin and all of that good stuff. So like I really have like a strong, I guess, roots with fantasy themes and tropes. And so I wanted it to be sort of based in a fantasy world. And I wanted it to be immersive, so you felt like you were playing as the character. And I think one of the things that we've done a really good job with is that connective tissue between what the characters are supposed to be and how you actually play them out in gameplay. Like ninjas are very quick and agile, and you get to do lots of moves in a single turn with all your go agains and it's like small kind of synergistic attacks. Whereas a guardian, for example, you really typically only get to do one thing, but it's like really big and powerful. And oftentimes, you can see the guardian like winding up to do his big heave, and you see it coming. But when it hits you hard. And our brutes are really like
Totally.
reckless, and they're savage and brutal, but they're like also just like reckless, and with like sort of like reckless abandon. They're out there to just demolish and attack the opponent, but all sense of care is thrown out the window at the same time. So lots of sort of like RNG elements are involved with our brutes. Um, and our warriors, for example, are completely focused and centric around their weapons. So like I think we've done a good job of like really making the heroes and the classes feel like true to what they're supposed to be when you're actually playing the game. And then we put so much work into actually developing the characters, so they all have their backstory, and they're all part of this big narrative and story arc that's running throughout our world. And during that 7 year period of developing Flesh and Blood, it wasn't just developing the game, but it was about building the world. And we were very, very particular about our storytelling, where the story arc, this multi-year story arc, is going, and how each of the different regions, which have their own look and feel and culture, and motives behind them, agendas, how they each like fit into this world, and the different characters that come from these regions, and how they sort of like fit into that bigger picture. And you can see on our website, fabtcg.com, we are publishing story content like really regularly. And you go to the hero pages, you can read about the regions and read about the stories behind each of their characters, and their what your motives and agendas are, and trials and tribulations, all that stuff. So there's many different layers to what Flesh and Blood is, and I think that that's been really critical in connecting with a broader audience. Flesh and Blood isn't this uber elite game. Like, yes, we have Pro Tour and all the competitive circuit, but most people playing Flesh and Blood are playing it because they just like the game. It's just a good, fun game, and the kinds of characters that exist in it are just really compelling, and people are connecting with them, and they want to play as Viserai or Dorinthia or Bravo,
Right.
because there's some affinity that they found with that particular character.
Yeah, that's really awesome, and I always tell people that too, because now I'm like sort of dabbling in the competitive scene, but I love playing it casually. Like, you can just like, I'll have some people over and we'll just play some blitz decks, or I have a couple like classic constructed decks that I have together. There's just like, let's just play and have a good time. So I think that is very special about it, and also, again, like you were saying, the different heroes, and the fact that the ranger, you have to have arrows in the arsenal to fire them. It's so clever and well thought out. And I think, I always wonder, like, when I get sort of like hooked on a game, what is it about it? And it's all those things you just mentioned. And again, like I said, the hand management decisions of not drawing back every time is just excruciating. Like, what do I want to do with my hand of 4 cards here? So I think that was really cool. Did you originally, when you guys, you mentioned you were working on this for a while, did you start with just like 2 types of heroes and then gradually come up with more, or were you like, from the beginning, we're gonna have these 6 types of heroes, let's work them all out?
Yeah, so from pretty early on, like, I knew the kinds of classes and the talents that we wanted to have in the game, and um, like, people who've been following Flesh and Blood will be familiar with the fact that our first 3 sets only had classes, and then from our 4th set, Monarch, we introduced talents. But our game was actually designed from the very beginning to have classes and talents, so you could have like like a light warrior, for example, or a shadow runeblade, and so on. But we sort of like stepped into that over the first couple of years of launching the game across the world, so that the first product that came out was kind of as simple as it possibly could be. And then we sort of added in layers of complexity as we moved forward. For me, it was really important that we spend that 7 years to make sure that the game would elegantly evolve over time as well, and that we really put in the hard work to make sure that we understood like the depth and breadth of what the game system is. The classes that the game system was primarily developed around, though, was actually Ninja. That was a fundamental to the start, and it sort of like really is how we built out the combat system with the chain links, and how like go again is a very critical part of the game system. And yeah, like, for viewers who aren't familiar with Flesh and Blood, basically you have 2 constraints that you're having to work within in the game. One is resource points, which you obtain by pitching cards, which is essentially taking a card from your hand and putting it in your pitch zone, and then you get some number of resource points, either 1, 2, or 3 resource points, depending on the pitch value of that card. And then the other constraint you're working within is you get 1 action point per turn. Anyone who's played Dominion will be familiar with this mechanic. You get 1 action per turn, and in Dominion, I think a lot of the cards say like gain 1 action point or plus 1 action point, or things like that. Like Village, Village was always a great card. I think played gain 2 action points. You can like play out lots of cards. So go again is kind of similar to that, and for Flesh and Blood, where if something doesn't have go again, it's like that's kind of going to end your turn. You play your 1 thing, you're done. But if it has go again, you get to play out more stuff in your turn.
Cool. So, with a trading card game, What was your and what is your playtesting process like? Because I know it must be ongoing because you're constantly releasing new booster packs, introducing like new keywords and mechanisms. So, what was your playtesting process like initially when you were kind of getting it out the door? Do you still keep that same process now as you develop more decks and expansions for it?
Yes, I mean, in those early days from 2012 through to 2019, it was, the game itself was developed by myself and Chris Gearing, lead developer. And, we go way, way, way back. Uh, these days, we have a team of 12 full-time game developers. That's their only job Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, is just playing flesh and blood to make sure we're hitting all of those, sweet notes, that the game's balanced and fun and creating the sort of experiences that we want to deliver to the fans. So it's a lot more intensive these days.
Cool. Yeah.
They're also on a tight time frame as well. There's a big difference between 7 years to release the first product and 13 weeks to get a new booster set out the door these days. So a lot more pressures.
Big difference, big difference. That's cool. And I guess when you're playtesting something like that, do you guys kind of keep a log of your results, or how do you track the results that you're seeing with different cards to know like, hey, maybe this card's a little too strong or this card's really weak, you know?
Yeah, so I mean, there's sort of two parts to that. Yes, there is some data collection that we do collect and analyze. Things like win rates obviously is a simple one, and things like play draw, outcomes based on who goes first, who goes second, things like that. But it's a lot more fluid than you might think. It's really just about having daily meetings. So at the end of each day, 4:30 every day, the team gets together and talks about the findings from throughout that day's session, and we'll come to some consensus on things that need to adjust. We call them levers. Levers get pulled up and down on certain cards, whether it's cost or pitch value, power, defense. Like maybe the effect adjusts slightly, and then those changes will get committed. Like normally, that's something that I do myself in the evenings, and a change log will get posted to our internal comms, and then the team will come back the next day and integrate all of those changes from the change log into their decks to rinse and repeat.
Cool, cool. Wow, that's awesome. Sounds like a fun job.
It's fun. Yeah.
So, at the point in those 7 years where you were really like designing and developing Flesh and Blood, what would you say was your like biggest challenge that you faced?
There isn't one single biggest challenge. I mean, there were so many times throughout that journey where it's like you feel like you've hit the wall, and it's like something insurmountable has presented itself. But you just got to be really like determined. Just you got to search for solutions, design solutions, and sometimes it requires just unplugging. Taking some time out, and it's surprising when solutions will come to you. I mean, there's been so many times in the middle of the night I've woken up, and then the answer's like there in my mind. So
That's cool.
it's there's not really one specific thing that I can pinpoint, but just like literally dozens and dozens of things that felt critical at the time, but you just work through.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Don't give
so
up.
don't give up. Exactly, exactly. So along those lines, like do you recall any specific like aha moments that you had when you were designing like, "Oh, we figured out XYZ," you know?
Yeah, sure. There's three that really come to mind. The first is the pitch mechanics. So as I mentioned, to get resources in a game, you take one of the four cards in your hand and put it in the pitch zone to get those resources. And then at the end of your turn, all of the cards in your pitch zone go on the bottom of your deck. So the really cool thing about that, obviously, is like the cards that you're pitching early in the game, which are typically the ones that give you the most resources but have the weakest effects, are the ones that you have to draw at the end of the game to try and finish the game. So it kind of captures that essence of fatigue. You start the game at your absolute strongest, and as the game progresses, you actually get weaker and weaker and weaker over time. Very like it's like the inverse of a lot of games that ramp up in their resource base and end the game on your most powerful stuff. So that's a really unique element of Flesh and Blood. But in the very beginning, we didn't have the pitch mechanic. We didn't have the pitch zone. To get resources, you would simply discard the card. And that
Oh.
created a hell of a lot of problems in and of itself, of like running out of deck, and interactions that we wanted to exist with cards in the graveyard became too easy to enable because you just discard the card to get it in your graveyard to get
Ah,
resources, and then like manipulate it later on another way. So there was like a really elegant solution that added so much flavor to this concept of like one-on-one combat where you actually wear out as the game progresses, which we really wanted to capture. Like for me, a combat scenario, like you start the fight at your strongest and
Right.
you get tired as the fight drags on, right? So
Right.
the pitch mechanic really achieved that. The second thing was Arsenal. So we didn't like for those people who aren't familiar with Fish and Blood, you get 4 cards every turn essentially. Every turn you're getting 4 new cards, but it's a very transient sort of like play pattern. And what we found is like we really wanted something where you could build to card synergies. But if you're only ever relying on drawing 4 random cards, it's really hard to pair up particular cards that you're trying to synergize together. Because in Flesh and Blood, you're very incentivized to use all 4 cards every single turn. So the solution to that we eventually came upon was the Arsenal, where you can put 1 card from your hand into your Arsenal at the end of your turn. And you can only have 1 Arsenal card. If you've got a card on Arsenal, that's it. You can't put another one in until you've used that one. So it's a very finite resource, but just even that one singular card meant you could sort of like save something for later until you could pair it up with the thing that you've been playing towards. So that was a really key one. And then the cycles that we have. So all of our commons and rares typically come in reds, yellows, and blues. The reds giving you 1 resource, but have the most powerful iteration of it. The yellows giving you 2 resources, and they have the mid-level iteration, and then the blues giving you the most resources, the 3 resources, but they're the weakest out of the three. It was New Year's Eve 2014. I remember it very specifically, and it was in my office. Our office was in the central city of Auckland, and like I could hear all of the party goers down below. It was in a place called the Viaduct, which is kind of party central in Auckland, and that's where our offices were. And all these people out on the street drinking and partying and hoo-hawing and having a great time, and I was still up in the design tank just tinkering away with Flesh and Blood. And it was at that moment that I realized, shit, our game has like these cycles, like these 3 cards that previously were separate cards. They're actually just iterations of themselves. This is back in 2014. It was with Fi,
Wow.
the ninja that appeared in Uprising that came out last July
Wow.
2022. So it's really funny that it was an 8-year gap between when I like was developing Fi and designing the game around Fi, and when he actually came out into the real world. It was 8 years later. But there was
Wild.
it was a massive aha moment, realizing that actually there's this really beautiful framework that exists within our game that creates so much cohesion and makes it really a lot easier for players to be able to process like what the like this cluster of cards does. So there was like a massive breakthrough moment for us.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Yeah, and yeah, as you're talking about all these things, I'm like, yes, like this is why I love this game so much. It's very cool. It's very cool to hear, the process and that it's not something that you just wake up and make this game. It takes years and years and years to kind of get it out there. One of
Yep.
the things I really love about it too is the art on the cards, and I just love the layout of the graphic design because it's just kind of clean and easy to follow. So, how were the art and graphic design decisions made?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate to have a absolutely brilliant co-founder. His name is Robbie Weiner. We've been working together for uh, you know, for over probably 15 years. Prior to Legends Story Studios, we were working together on other projects. But he's our creative director and co-founder of Legends Story Studios. And again, during that 7-year period from 2012 to 2019 when we launched, one piece of this project was designing the game. The other was designing the world and the stories and the heroes. And Robbie and I, we're the ones who built that together, to make sure that there was this really, again, cohesive, like immersion, integrated gameplay and story arc. We spent just so much time poring over the details of what the frames look like to capture the essence and that feeling of the different classes. So you look at the frames and it like really just speaks to you about what this class is. Like the ninjas have the samurai frames, the warriors have the more broadsword type frames. You can see sort of like the bow shape and the ranger frame. The brutes have the Marley club down the side. The guardians feel very like stony, robust, uh,
Hmm.
and solid, and so on and so on and so on. But I think that it was really key for us to capture the flavor of Flesh and Blood through these like visual design elements. And since over time we've been very fortunate to work with many of the industry's leading artists around the world. Some of the most famous fantasy and game artists in the world are doing art for Flesh and Blood on a regular basis, and we're very blessed to be working with that talent. But we really put a huge amount of resources, both money and time into really crafting every single piece of visual design for the game.
That's really cool because yeah, I know there are a lot of like fantasy games out there, board games, card games that sometimes can have like kind of cheesy artwork. And so I really appreciate the art on the cards in Flesh and Blood. That's another thing that kind of sucks me into it. So when and how did you come up with the name Flesh and Blood?
This is a great question. So again, like I knew that I wanted to have some sort of name that invoked that feeling of people coming together in person, but also for it to spark emotions of like combat and brutality and fighting and conflict. And we spent so long trying to come up with the perfect name, and it was actually what one day I was at yoga, and it was during shavasana. And at the very end of the session, I was like in this really deep meditative state, and just the name just came to me. It just came to me, and it just felt
That's awesome.
perfect. Like it captures that essence of in-person interaction, actually sitting across the table in the flesh and blood with another human being playing a game. At the same time, I felt like it embodied that feeling of like close combat of like the only thing that exists between like living and dying is the flesh that encases the blood and organs and everything in our body, and it's such a fragile thing. Like when the flesh is split and the blood is spilled, that's kind of like the end of the road
Right.
for your physical self. So it kind of ticked those two boxes, and I was like, this is the name, let's lock it in.
Very cool. Very cool. And then I guess so. Flesh and Blood originally released in 2019. Leading up to that, since you started designing and developing in 2012, when did you realize, hey, this game is ready to go out the door? It's ready to be produced.
So I would say that probably other established game designers will understand this, but it feels like a game is never quite finished. You can always keep polishing it and refining it and tweaking it, but you kind of just got to call time on it eventually and actually get it out into the public domain, for better or worse. And 7 years was a very long time. Granted, over that 7 years, we didn't just develop one product. We had developed the first like two and a half products actually were like pretty much ready to ship at that point in time. You just have to ship it, to be honest. You just have to ship it and let the world play with it and love it or hate it for what it is. And we were just at that point, would you can kind of like get to 90% good or 95% good, but the amount of time it takes to add every like incremental extra 1% of goodness is just like it's just diminishing returns.
Right.
Um, and I think that there's not really any time. I don't think there's any like specific thing that tells you like it's good enough to ship. It's really a judgment call. Yes, you can do focus groups and all of that sort of stuff, and there's value in that to a certain extent. But I think as a designer and as a development team, you just have to have some confidence. You actually have to have exercise some judgment that we're happy with this. Like we're a company full of gamers, right? Nearly everyone in the company is reflective of our fans and or customers essentially around the world. Like we are you. So if we're happy and having a good time playing the game, there's probably a fairly good chance that other like-minded gamers around the world are going to probably enjoy it as well. But you have to
Right.
be really brutally honest with yourself. When something sucks, you got to call yourself out on it as well. And you really got to work damn hard to get rid of the rough edges and polish it, and strive for excellence. And like, don't ship something that you wouldn't be happy to buy yourself. I think
Mm.
is the kind of the bottom line.
That is a good point and good way to put it. Cool. Well, James, so do you have any advice for someone out there who might be interested in diving into the world of designing a trading card game?
It's so hard. It's so hard. And my advice is that the game is only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to successfully launching and maintaining a trading card game. It's they're living things, so it's not like a board game where you can like make a board game and then just keep reproducing that board game for the next 10 years. Like trading card games, there's an expectation that they are a living ecosystem, that new content will be coming out every 3 or 4 months. And that is the expectation of the market. So once you're on the treadmill, you can't get off. So you have to have all of the infrastructure and the team around you to be able to support that kind of production pipeline. And as soon as you're on the treadmill, the pressures are real, right? Like as I said, the first product we got 7 years to get that out the door. Every product now we've got 13 weeks, and ain't just about designing a game. You got to do the game, you got to do the art, you got to do all the rules updates, you got to do a lot of stuff, all the marketing programs. So there's just so many things that you need to get set up to succeed in the trading card game segment specifically. But I would say to people who are just like game design, like don't let something being hard deter you. Like a lot of things in life are hard. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And it's okay to try and fail as well. And that's very much the attitude that we had from the beginning. Is like, we're going to try our best to make this succeed. There's a really good chance that it might not succeed. It might actually fail. And that's okay. But what's not okay is not trying at all in the first place. And that's kind of how we've always operated. And, we put in a lot of work, a lot of resources. We have some great people. We've got a big team and which is constantly growing as well. And that's sort of, all of these infrastructure and the things that sit outside the actual game design itself are absolutely critical for being able to achieve longevity and stand the test of time.
Cool. And I just realized I totally skipped over asking you. You mentioned rules. At what point did you and the team start documenting rules and that rule book for Flesh and Blood?
Sure. So I think there's two parts to this. Like all the way along the journey from 2012, I was writing stuff about the game and the system, as much for my own reasons and benefit as anything else. So there was actually some clarity around, the look and the feel of each of the different classes was supposed to be, because you can only create like unique identities if some classes can do certain things and they can't do other stuff. Like that's how you carve out niches and identities within the game system. So there was a lot of that, and also just like keywords and even namings, like card names. I spent a lot of time actually documenting these things, like light cards should be called these, like sort of like descriptives, and nothing else in the game system should ever draw on those descriptives, because that's how we carve out identity for the light talent, for example. So I did a lot of documentation in that sort of vein all across that 7 year development. When it comes to the actual rules, like across that journey, I was writing bits and pieces of rules, and kind of by the time we launched in 2019, there was a bit of a library, but it was fragmented, so to say. In my life, there's been two documents that have been incredibly challenging for me to write. Probably the two most important but challenging documents I've ever written in my life was one, the investment memorandum to actually get the capital to launch Legend Story Studios and publish this game. It was
Oh, wow.
a very intensive document. The second most difficult one was the comprehensive rules for Flesh and Blood version 1.0. It took a huge amount of time and a huge amount of just mental energy to actually get it written and documented, how the game system works at the nitty gritty level. And since then, we've actually hired a rules and policy manager, Joshua Scott. He's an absolutely incredibly hardworking, intelligent gentleman. He came in and actually took that and rewrote the entire thing into an incredibly detailed, absolutely robust document set. And that really is important for serving as a foundation for exactly how Flesh and Blood works, particularly when we have a competitive circuit that runs around the world. And I think that if you want to really achieve the gold standard, you have to have this document suite that underpins how the game system actually works. There is no vagueness, there's no ambiguity. If you want to know how the game works, the comprehensive rules are there. Saying that, if you want to play casually, don't read that document. You do not need to read that document. Go and watch our 6 minute learn to play video. It's all you need to get going. And don't worry about the comp rules. Leave that to the pro players. But just coming back to really your actual question, like writing the rules is a big project, and to do it to really the gold standard, it's a full-time job. His job is rules and policy manager, and that's all he does, Monday to Friday, 40 hours a week, is just keeping our rules curated and working with our judge program around the world. We've got over 3,000 registered judges around the world as well. So like having
Wow.
distilling that information into our judge network around the world is like a really key part of maintaining a Flesh and Blood ecosystem as well.
Wow, wow. That's cool. And yes, that comprehensive rule book is comprehensive. It's like a technical
Stay
document.
away from it.
Oh,
I would say, Candice, just like the one thing that I think is beautiful about trading card games is you can play them however you want, right? If you want to be that uber competitive pro tour chasing player, the comprehensive rules is for you, right? And all of the OP programs and the Pro Tour and the national champs and all of that competitive stuff, that's there for you. If you just want to play Flesh and Blood for fun at home on the kitchen table with your friends and family, you don't need to care about that stuff. Just play the game
Right.
for fun. Buy
Right.
the 11.99 Blitz decks, right? We've got all these beautiful play out of the box products, $12, play out of the box. You're good
Right.
to go.
Right.
The decks are fun. Watch the 6 minute learn to play video and just enjoy the game and have fun. And I think that's the really beautiful thing about TCGs is they appeal to so many different people in so many different ways.
That's cool. That's awesome. Well, James, thank you so much for being here today. And like, it was awesome to hear the backstory for how you and the team at Legend Story Studios created Flesh and Blood. I know that this is, again, it's a living ecosystem, like you said. So, is there anything you can share about what's coming next down the road? I know we have Outsiders coming soon. Probably by the time this episode drops, Outsiders will just be releasing. But if there's anything else you want to share about what's coming next, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. So yeah, Outsiders is the next big thing for us. It releases on the 24th of March in 5 languages simultaneously around the world. So obviously
Wow.
English, French, German, Spanish, and Italian, all
Wow.
on March the 24th. And so that's a full booster set, but it also comes with blitz decks. So there's 6 Outsiders blitz decks. And for the first time ever, you can buy the blitz decks as like a box set. So that, again, the blitz decks are like 12 US for the deck, or you can buy them as a box set of 6. And those decks have been designed to play really awesomely against each other. So I think if you want to play casually, I would highly recommend the Outsiders Blitz decks as a box set to get your play group started. When we head through to mid-year, we have Dusk Till Dawn, which is our next booster set that's releasing on July
Ooh.
the 14th. That's bringing us back to the big macro level story arc of the War of the Monarchs, Light versus Shadow. So a lot of our story and the plot is really coalesces around this War
Cool.
of the Monarchs, which is raging in the world of Wraith. So that's going to be a really big hitting set. It's our 10th booster set already, which is
Wow.
like a really big
Cool.
milestone. I'm super excited about. I can tell we've pulled out all the stops for Dusk Till Dawn, and I think it's the most excited that I've been about any product that we've
Awesome.
made. So
Very nice. Awesome.
great products coming down the pipeline in 2023, and yeah, pick up the Outsiders Blitz sticks to get started. That's the way to go.
Cool, cool. Well, James, again, thank you so much. This was like really cool and enlightening to kind of hear the backstory for Flesh and Blood. I'm very much looking forward to digging into Outsiders and Dust Till Dawn, it's called the next one.
That's the one.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Looking forward to it. And thank you again for being here. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for inviting me on the show, Candice. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all for watching Cardboard Creations. Hopefully, it's been as inspiring and fascinating for you as it has been for me. And remember, the only way to get something done is to start doing it.